Hello, and good day. As you know, I am dead now.
Ladies and gentlemen, Linda Cullen and Bob Robertson.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good night. President Clinton, you came for a visit last week.
Yes, I did. I came to Ottawa to officially open the new U.S. Embassy, and I was so thrilled because I laid the cornerstone.
Yes, sir. It was Droid City, sir. Can we help you at all?
This parts and service?
This is parts and service, yes. Of course it is.
I bought a female droid about 6 months ago from you.
Yes, did you get the wife or the girlfriend model, sir?
I got the wife model, the one with the curlers and the old housecoat.
Oh, yes, of course. And what was the problem, sir? Any
Well,
problem?
you see, she has this a problem in her neck. It squeaks.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so when she shakes her head, it just drives her crazy.
What about the warranty on the...
Yeah, I had the 12 million words or 12 hours, whatever comes first.
Yeah, well, you know, of course, that with the wife model, that runs out pretty fast.
Yeah,
of course,
yeah.
you know.
Okay.
Perhaps the most slap-happy pathy in the purported plethora of dangling daddios, i.e. those whose infantile infatuation with the often misunderstood hypothesis, namely that the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the angle of the dangle, are in fact overly hung up, as the Gen Xers might put it, in pondering the diorama of daily doofus droppings emanating from, of all places, the op-ed outpourings of utterly deranged doppelgangers. Good evening. Repeating our top story. Rogaine doesn't work for everyone.
This is Grapes with my newest Rock'em Sock'em video. And no hockey this time. This is Rock'em Sock'em Life. Fisticuffs with average Joes like you and me. How about my Rock'em Sock'em Parliament? No more boring question period. How about your MPs duking it out like real men? Look at these guys go, eh? Me and Bull vote for these guys anytime. Bull, beauty stuff. Never think like that, like that, like that.
You ask Ronald Reagan yourself. Well, look, George, that is not fair. I realize that you people here tonight have a great deal on your minds. Well, such is not the case with me. But I do remember visiting the city of Ottawa not that long ago. I was standing on a stage and I was singing something with Byron Muldoon. I don't remember what it... I know his wife Milo was up there with us, but you know, like so many of you visitors to this city, I have myself stood and looked out over the sparkling waters of the Rideau Canal. I remember looking at it for the first time over that vast expanse of water, and I remember what I thought. I thought, boy, oh boy, have I ever got to go to the bathroom? That's where that trickle-down theory started from. You know, it started right from there.
Yes, a woman was walking through the woods near town when she fell into a ravine and wasn't rescued for over 3 hours. Jack, does the Bible speak of this as a sign that the end is near?
Oh, yes, Rexella, it certainly does. Hiawatha 7:13 says, "And a ravine shall spring up as if from nowhere and smite thee, ripping thy tibia from its socket and tossing it to the wolverines." Or in Aggravations 14:4, it is clear from the words of Hagar that surely ye will see your end and smell your end when your end is close. Or this, at the sign of butt ooze and slimy rivulets across your thighs, shall ye know he has come for thee, yea, with a scythe to snip off thy chicklets and feed them to the swans of hell. Orifice 11:25. There's more, Rexella. At the rapture, those who do not believe shall be whipped with small wet ferrets across the nape of their neck and made to French kiss a cocker spaniel until once again the heaving of the stomach produces a hurling of fluids and great chunks of corn. Lexus GS 300. And it goes on and on. If ye would save yourself from an army of cockroaches marching through your BVDs after feeding on an old meatloaf, ye must submit. Tarnation 17:9. When the trumpet sounds, those who are not with us shall have their fingers caught in the door and slam, 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 slam. Mogilny 18:37. And in Succotash 11:41 it says clearly, even the small farmer with only a sacred cow and a lowly ass, when the judgment occurs, surely you will bid farewell to your sacred cow and kiss your sorry ass goodbye.
Good heavens, Jack, that is
Speaking of John Crosby, here he is, the Minister of Fish.
Well, look it. I'm not going to tell any jokes tonight, that's for certain. Otherwise, the 4 horsewomen of the apocalypse will come screaming and snorting out of the sky.
the first thing you'll do now you have all this spare time?
Well, Margaret, I'm going to write about all the wonderful people that I've met in the media.
So it's going to be a book?
No, a pamphlet.
What will your loved ones do if you die? If you haven't thought about it, then it's time to call No Such Insurance. Remember, no salesman will call on you, there's no medical exam, and no one will ask you for money. What I like about it is, no salesman called on us, there was no medical exam, and
no one asked us for any money. That was the best part.
At No Such Insurance, we guarantee you peace of mind, because no salesman will call on you, there's no medical exam, and no one will ask you for money. What do you get from it? Absolutely nothing. Isn't that
a lot of people think that I just make up my mind depending on which way the wind breaks, you know? But, you know, I have been long and hard thinking about this. And, you know, I do have first term as the Prime Minister of Canada. I do a second term. Now I have decided to do a third. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Wow! I feel good.
Oh, and if the service hasn't happened yet, I don't want any jazz or soul music.
It's wheelie. That's dangerous. Thank you, everybody, for coming to celebrate my guy. Okay, I'm okay. It's going to take, if you got a couple of hours, it's going to take a couple of hours. I'm so glad we started with a piper, you know, Robertson. I mean, it's just so fitting. Originally, I thought what I wanted to do was just hand out haggis to everybody. The families, they didn't seem very fond of that idea, and you know, hot day, it get a little ripe. So yes, a piper. Now, as you heard at the end of that piece, he didn't want any soul music or any jazz. So I thought that the best thing to do would be to start off today with something a little jazzy, because we don't have to do what he says anymore. You know? He's dead. So I've invited today a good friend of ours that we met years and years ago at CKNW, Julie Brown. She was a newsreader then, went on to anchor news shows and other, what were the other stations, Julie? I've forgotten. Yeah, who cares? Who cares? So she, with her accompanist, Tom Arnson, Julie is in a group with two other ladies called the Hot Mamas. Two of them aren't here today because they just got way too hot, and they spontaneously combusted. It was unbelievable and very messy. So we have Julie and Tom today, and I'd like to ask them to come up. And they're just going to sing a little something that Bob and I called our lottery, big lottery win number. But you'll recognize it when you hear it. Tom and Julie.
Every time it from heaven. Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from heaven? You'll find your fortunes falling all over town. Be sure that your umbrella's upside down. Trade it for a package of sunshine and flowers. If you want the things you love, you must have showers. So when you hear it thunder, don't run under a tree. There'll be pennies from heaven for you and me. Every time it rains, pennies from heaven. Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from heaven? You'll find your fortunes falling all over the town. Be sure that your umbrella's upside down. Trade them for a package of sunshine and flowers. If you want the things you love, you must have showers. So when you hear it thunder, don't run under a tree. There'll be pennies from heaven for you, pennies from heaven for me, pennies from heaven for you and me. Singing in the rain.
Thank you, Julie and Tom. And Julie, you are appropriately hot. You're just the right hot. You're not super, combustible hot, but just the right kind of hot. I just wanted to remind you, I'm sure most of you have got the cards that we handed out, and that's to write something, if you'd like to write something to Bob, about Bob. There's a box out in the lobby that you can put the card in afterwards. We will, later on, when I get all the cards, I will have a draw, and the winner will get 6 hours of root canal work free, or prostate exam, whichever you prefer. And there's no pressure. If you would rather not, if you can't think of anything to write to him, that's okay. I would appreciate a 0-calorie, delicious cheesecake recipe, just so that I can keep eating my emotions without the disastrous side effects. That's what I would love. You know, I can't believe we're here for this. It's very hard to process that this is real, you know, and of course when you go through this, and I know so many of you have gone through something, everybody goes through something like this, and you know, you have to go and do the business of it all, and you're standing at some counter sobbing with some, you know, infant at Best Buy trying to figure out, you know, how to fix the computer, and he's talking on the headsets, and you know, it's all, I just think that it's a mistake. I think that, you know, at some point, he'll walk up behind me, he'll be reconstituted somehow, but I know that that's not true, and that's not possible, because I have him at home in 2 small boxes, and I just think that's a very big job, very big job. Bob was born in Newcastle upon Tyne, England, which sort of explains a lot. You know, that British sense of humor, that English sense of humor, that kind of where that came from. When he was a teenager in Ajax, Ontario, one day his dad came home with Beyond the Fringe LP. And so I guess they all listened to this. Probably most of the family sat and listened to this in the evening. But I think Bob wore this album out because that was it for him. It was, these men, these guys who were so literate, so funny, so creative. They early on became his comedy idols. And that's also what he loved about our first guest today. He's smart, he's literate, he's politically intelligent, way, way, way over more to the left than we are. But still, it's okay. He's incredibly, incredibly funny. He's a regular on the Debaters. He teaches at UBC. He's written books. As a matter of fact, Bob wrote a book 5 years ago called Mayan Horror: How to Survive the End of the World in 2012, which sold tens of copies, by the way, in this country. So it was a Canadian bestseller, I just want you to know. And a few years later, Charlie released a book called The Horrors. So you can see they had the same cheery outlook on life. But that's what Bob recognized in him, a kindred spirit. So I'd like you to welcome today our friend, Charlie Demers.
We use podia like these on the Debaters, and I like working with them because I find them slimming. I would have wanted Bob to know that I wore wool dress pants today, which is, on a hot summer day, more or less the highest tribute that a fat man can pay. One of the odd things that can happen when you lose a very funny friend is that they can end up being the one who comforts you. In the days after we lost Bob, the internet was full of people telling their favorite double exposure stories, relaying their favorite bits. There were videos that you could watch in which you could see Bob Robertson, who was at that point the only person who was blissfully unaware that Canada had lost Bob Robertson. And he was being hilarious, as he always was. And when you were watching and when you were laughing, it somehow simultaneously made things both easier and harder. Somebody, I think at the CBC, put together sort of a supercut of greatest hits. And it had everybody who you would expect to see in there was in there. It was Bob doing Don Cherry, it was Bob doing Katien, but my favorite moment in the clip was Linda as Chantal Hébert arguing with Bob as Alan Gregg, the pollster. Bob is wearing a funny little goatee and a funny wig, but he's playing it perfectly straight. There's no mugging. He's brilliant. He sounds more like Alan Gregg than Alan Gregg does. And in watching that, it occurred to me that the fact that Bob not only did an impression of Alan Gregg, but did a perfect impression of Alan Gregg, kind of tells you all you need to know about Bob's comedy. It's the same as his Bill Vander Zalm impression. You don't spend time honing an absolutely tone-perfect impression of a Canadian pollster or a regional politician who nobody's ever heard of 7 minutes south of the border because you're looking to land some big Hollywood agent or looking to impress Lorne Michaels in New York. You do it because you care about being funny, You do it because you care about jokes, and you do it because you care about the place that you're in. And Bob did. Bob cared about satire. He cared about mocking corruption and dishonesty, pompousness. And I know that he cared about those things because we talked about them. We had conversations about those things off stage, but I would have known it just from his body of work. Bob's impressions were like if somebody, a cousin, could do a perfect rendition of your aunt or your grandfather. They were intimate family impressions that were based on love and based on deep roots in place. The other thing that I loved about that clip was that it was Bob as I think he will be remembered, which was opposite Linda. I can say, having been both things, that two of the most intimate possible relationships that two human beings can have with each other are to be a spouse and to be a comedy partner. Both relationships take such a perfect and fragile balance of chemistry and of trust. And the compounded intimacy of two people who had found both in each other is something that radiated from Bob and Linda anytime you had the honor of being in their presence together. To say the very least, Bob's generation of comedians was not full of great role models for how to relate to women. How to relate to women either as professional peers or just as human beings in your life. And this was just one other way in which Bob was exceptional. It was one other way in which I was so happy to look up to him. And it was one more reason why I was so proud to have him as a friend. We love you, Bob. Thank you so much for having me here today and letting me be part of this. And let's eat and get drunk and do whatever we have to our emotions to shove them back down. I have a great cheesecake recipe for you, Linda, and as you can see, it's working out very well. Thank you.
Hi, friends of Bob and fans of Double Exposure. There was one remarkable thing about Linda and Bob when they taped Double Exposure in the day, and that was because they could do it at a time when it was okay to be politically incorrect. Today, you know, you have to be very politically correct or it doesn't fly. For instance, Linda always portrayed Pat Carney as having a lisp. On all my scripts that she did, I lisped. And of course, today, if you lisped, you would be charged with some sort of human rights abuse. And similarly, Bob always portrayed Joe Clark as being beat up by me. Well, today you'd face assault charges, except of course unless you were in the House of Commons and you were Trudeau the Younger and you were manhandling the leader of the opposition. Still, there is one myth I would like to clear up about Double Exposure. It was not true that I pushed Joe Clark off the sailboat when the Conservative Party's fortunes were sinking. I merely was trying to do a course correction, bring Joe a little bit around to the right, and oops, man overboard. Sorry, Joe. Miss you, Bob. Thank you, Linda.
I don't know where she gets this lisp thing from. It wasn't a lisp. It was when she was teaching at the University of British Columbia. She was there because she was very concerned about education, about the 3 W's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. But you don't argue with Pat. That was lovely. It was lovely, Pat. It was at the beginning of it. I was a little worried she was going to veer off into some thing, but she pulled it around, and that's great. That's great. Charlie reminded me about Bill Vander Zalm, and which, of course, you know, really was one of Bob's most incredible voices. Of course, in the days of, you know, doing the radio show, we did so much Vander Zalm stuff, and people used to say to us, you know, we'd get letters, and they'd say, you know, we like you even though you're such a West Coast-centered comedy show, and you know, we said, well, that's because, I know it's because we're doing so much Vander Zalm, but he's crazy. So, of course, you would, you know, if the premier at that time of Saskatchewan was as crazy. He wasn't, because I think it was Roy Romano, not quite as nuts. You know, nobody else had at the premiers, the First Ministers Conference of Canada, the premiers at Fantasy Gardens taking a ride on the tiny train. So, and I will, just a little aside too, which has nothing to do with Bob really, but one day when we were at CBC, I got a call. We were taping the show. I got a call, and Fay Leung was upstairs in the lobby. Fay Leung of "What's the matter with you? Where's my money? Where's my money? You got to pay me my money." And I mean, it was really her in the flesh. You know, with some dead creature on her head, like she always wore. And she wanted to, the deal was she wanted to do a tour of stand-up clubs with me, and we would do Dueling Fays. And I know you'll be surprised when I tell you, I turned that offer down. Although now, maybe there could have been some money in it, and you know, maybe it was a mistake. Who knows? We made plenty of those financial errors along the way. Anyway, moving on to our next guest. Jackson Davies is a man of many, many talents, many skills and abilities. For years and years and years, he kept the people of the Sunshine Coast completely safe from any lumber theft, which apparently was huge up there, as RCMP constable. But you'd never know it to look at him, because he looks so responsible. He is also famous or infamous for ramming the supertanker Exxon Valdez onto the rocks, spilling billions and billions of barrels of oil, killing all kinds of creatures. I mean, it's, you know, as I say, he just looks so reliable. But he was drinking. And that's believable. But he was with Bob in those early days, and has a lot of stories too. I know. So, well, I'll tell you later. Doesn't matter. Mind. So please, I would like you to give a warm welcome to the destroyer of pristine wilderness, Jackson Davies.
Thank you. Of course, during playing the skipper, I got to say that wonderful line, no, I said Tanqueray on the rocks. I like Pat Carney, too. She's, except she introduced me to Princess Margaret and said, I'd like to introduce you to one of BC's most well-known actors, Jefferson Davies. Probably wouldn't get a laugh now. I was lucky. I got to work with Bob a lot. I first met him in 1978. I know, I don't like doing the math, but that's a while ago. We were hired by Chris Payton to do a little sketch comedy show from CBC, a regional show when CBC did wonderful regional shows. And it was called, What's a Nice Show Like You Doing in a Place Like This? The reason it was called that is that we couldn't find any studio space, so we did it at the Penthouse Cabaret, which is a strip joint for the people who don't want to remember. And it just lost its license for probably any number of things. So we took over the Penthouse. I like Bob in about, I don't know, 5 seconds. Not only was he was a wonderful talent, he was a good person. And that's important to me. And we connected on a number of levels. We're kind of goofy. And we also have this love of the comic art of the whoopee cushion. Now, the whoopee cushion is getting a bit of a bad rap, and I think it's misunderstood because really it's not about putting the whoopee cushion under someone else's couch and letting them sit on it. No, it's putting the whoopee cushion under your cushion, you sit on it, and then you don't have any reaction, and you watch everyone else react to it. It's an art. I remember one day him coming to work with this huge smile on his face, and he said, I got Patrick, his son. He said, what I did is I said we were going to go have a very serious talk in a room, but I'd already slipped the whoopee cushion under my seat. So I sit down on it. It makes this incredible farting sound, you see. But I don't play it at all. I just look at Patrick, keep calling him, keep giving us this. And I said, Patrick, and the joy in his face as his relined. He said, Patrick was trying not to laugh. And then he started to laugh. And then he has asthma, right? So then it kicked in. And he said, I almost killed my son, but it was a funny bit. What we would do is and this was wonderful. This was a wonderful time. I mean, this is things you want to do as a comic. We were hired as a performer and writers as well. So we'd start Monday. We have to have an hour show by Friday night in front of a live audience. And what it would do, it was a regional show. It would play after the hockey games. So it would play in different time zones across the country. Now, was it good? As one of my characters on the show I played a magician, used to say, sometimes the magic works, sometimes you cut your bunny in half. We made the mistake of showing me cut the bunny in half, and the phone calls came. But it was a treat. Remember coming to work one day and seeing Bob putting on a gown. He had this idea that he wanted to play Queen Elizabeth reading the sportscast. Worked a treat. Bob and I at one time thought it'd be really funny to have everyone in a sketch do an Ed Sullivan impression. For no apparent reason. We killed the bunny that night. I also remember that. We also, one time, we did a whole show where we had a barbershop quartet in each scene. Again, no apparent reason. It was kind of like a Greek tragedy gone really bad. But one I remember most is Bob writing a sketch for Rick Honey about, there was a new Pope, Pope John Paul I. And Bob wrote a commercial for him, an American Express commercial. And it said, the idea, Rick would say, you know, when I take off these robes and travel, nobody knows who I am, right? So that's why I carry an American Express card. Don't leave Rome without it. It was, you know, worked. It worked. It got Friday night in front of the live audience. It worked. Saturday night, it showed in the East, because of the time zone a little earlier than Vancouver, and then the phones went off the hook. It seems that Pope John Paul I had died. So Chris Payton said, oh my God, we got to get it off the air. We're making fun of the Pope. So she's trying to get something else to put in and whatever. And Bob's going, no, don't do that. Don't do that. He said, the punchline, don't leave Rome without it, still works. You know, Bob was the type of performer who's very giving. He would, he had no problems writing sketches for other people. He's, he didn't care if he had to play the straight man. And it wasn't really about who got the laugh. It was about the beauty of the laugh. And I want to thank Bob for sharing that beauty with me.
Thank you, Jackson. Well, turns out, as I'm telling this little anecdote, we have Faye Leung in the audience. Faye, wave to everybody. I'm gonna... Yeah, you pay me the money. You pay me the money. Okay, with interest. Let's go on tour. Let's do it now, Faye. Come on, take it outside. Come on, I'm going to go with you. Well, Faye was a big supporter and a good sport. She came to our show. How many times did you come to our TV show? 3, 4? Not enough. That's right. Okay, shut up now. Oh, geez. Oh, there goes my cap. Oh, God, that's funny. Now Faye's not a politician, but we have, I know there's at least one politician in the audience, Bill Harper. Bill? Now, Bob never did an impression of Bill, because really there's nothing to work with. But... I think that, yeah, okay, Faye, it's not your show. I think what happens with, people like Bob and politicians show up at celebrations of life, people will think, oh, they just want to give their respect, but I think they want to make sure he's gone. Bob came from parents, which makes sense, but his family, they were all very creative. His mother was on track to be a singer. In England, she wanted to be a singer. She had a fabulous voice, and I think she sang once on a BBC radio show, and she had plans. And like so many of that generation, some stupid war got started, and those plans go by the wayside. So you get on with life, and you do other things. And his dad was, also an entertainer. He certainly didn't start out the way Bob's mom did, thinking professionally, but he liked to tell a good joke, and he liked to laugh, and Bob has two brothers and a sister, and all creative in their own ways. All very musical, and Bob was, very musical. So we have with us today his brother John. Now, John used to live here way back in the 80s, and if you picture him with bleach blonde, spiky hair, you may have gone to see him in a Billy Idol tribute band called Rebel Yell. But I think it, might be that old joke that if you can actually remember that, you weren't there in the 80s, so something like that. Anyway, John is going to come and play a song for you that was one of Bob's favorites. Bob loved anthems. Not country anthems, although he was fond of the national anthem of Uzbekistan, which, has a big goat finish at the end. But he liked songs that had anthemic themes to them, sort of songs that were written about, figuring out life and what life meant, and we both liked that. We both liked these songs. This one is an old one, but he really loved it. It's an old Scottish song, and he really loved it. So I'd like to get John up here to do that for you, and Tom is going to help him along here as well. John D. Robertson, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks for bringing up Billy Idol.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure you're happy.
Thanks for bringing up Billy Idol. How's that, Todd? Good? Got signal there? I just want to say first, what a great service. Everybody should have one like this, don't you think? Remembered fondly. It's beautiful. Guy, I love my brother. He emceed at our wedding. What a great wedding that was. Best MC in the world. Also, I just wanted to share a little story that Bob did I made a comment to him about, I hardly remember you around when I was really little. Of course, I don't have a great memory when I was really little. I'm not sure, if we hung out too much. And he proceeded to send me a photograph very quickly of us on a beach at a place called Pigeon Lake in Ontario. And I was about 3, and he was playing with me on the beach. I said, there you go. He proved to me that he played with me when I was little, that we hung out, because he left home and worked in radio stations from when I can remember. So anyway, this one's for Bob. 1, 2, 3, 4. Every road through life is a long, long road filled with joy and sorrow too. As you journey on, may your heart be strong for the things most dear to you. With wealth and love, it's so, but onward we must go. Keep right on to the end of the road. Keep right on to the end. Though the way be long, let your heart be strong. Keep right on round the bend. If you're tired and weary, just journey on till you come to your happy abode, where all you love and you're dreaming of will be there at the end of the road. Keep right on to the end of the road. Keep right on to the end. With a big stout heart to a long steep hill, we can get there with a smile. With a good kind thought and an ending view, we can cut short many a mile. So let courage every day be your guiding star always. Keep right on to the end of the road. Keep right on to the end. Though the way be long, let your heart be If you're tired and weary, still journey on till you come to your happy abode, where all you love and you're dreaming of will be there at the end of the road. Thank you.
Those Scots. 28 years ago, Bob and I came to this spot in the summer to see the very first Bard on the Beach production. Anybody else here come to that show? Midsummer Night's Dream. And we got eaten alive by these little no-see-ums, you know, they just sort of burrowed into your hair and just tormented us through the night. But if you take away the fact that, you know, essentially we were drained of our blood by these little vampire bugs, we thought this was the most incredible thing in the most wonderful place. We just loved it. Coming to this beach, coming to see Shakespeare in such a fabulous spot. And I guess through the winter, after their season closed, the force behind all of this, Christopher Gaze, called us at CBC one day and he asked us to come and perform at a Pie and Pint fundraiser for the next season. And of course we said yes because, you know, we just fell in love with Chris right away. I mean, who doesn't? Who doesn't fall in love with this guy instantly? Well, there was one guy who was not very fond of him, but I think it was all because of this horrible, disfiguring codpiece accident. So, I mean, he kind of had a reason, but we loved Chris right away, and we had many, many years where we had so much fun being involved with Bard. So I've asked Chris to read from his book, Mayan Horror, How to Survive the End of the World in 2012, because, well, he knows how to read, so it just kind of made it easier. I had very few people to choose from, so Chris, please.
Always disheartening. There we are. So this, you missed that. Can you help me, sir? That's right. Todd can fix it. Yeah, I know, it's one of those things. Great, thank you. So this is from Bob's book. Now it's the foreword. Let me introduce myself. I am Professor A. Jinkerson, PVC, MLB, DST. I was very pleased to be asked to write the foreword to this landmark book. As a trained catastrophist and the lead scientist of the Armageddon Lab here at the University of Southern British Columbia, I have dedicated my entire professional life to searching for a cure for cataclysms. Bob's uncanny ability to clearly explain cataclysmic events was the first evident in his groundbreaking children's book explaining the Big Bang, titled what if God lit his fart? He followed that up with an enlightening book about the great flood called How Did Noah Round Up 2 Fruit Flies? His award-winning documentary about Pompeii running quickly in sandals won the Caligula Prize for pallid writing at the Win by Luck Festival in Come by Chance, Newfoundland. Now, this book, Mayan Horror, How to Survive the End of the World in 2012, picks up where his last book, The Aztecs Predicted George W. Bush, left off. Anyway, that's the foreword to the book. There it is. Thank you. Now, as Linda said, we met so many years ago. Bob and Linda, I guess, became addicted to Bard, and they became addicted through their own generosity and kindness to helping us. As Linda says, they showed up everywhere. We had our special events, fundraisers, where in those days, you know, if we raised $1,800, we were happy. And I always remember those fundraisers in the early days, 91, 92, 93, and on. Especially at the first one, we had no money at all. They arrived, and I thought, I suppose I've got to buy them drinks. And, you know, I would have done it, except I said, would you like a drink? And they just looked at me and said, yes, don't worry, we'll get them. And without even, there was no embarrassment at all, but they understood. There was no money, and they were there to help. It's the essence of who Bob was, who Bob and Linda are. And finally, all that generosity of time and effort and money, was it when you left CBC? Was it, yeah. When they left CBC, they decided to give a big concert, and they took over the Vancouver Playhouse, and we sold all the tickets. We helped, because the whole thing, and everyone that you see entertaining today, and all these great names, they all sent in video things, or they showed up, and Bob and Linda, of course, made a huge show. They donated every penny of that, and when we were small, that was 20 years ago, that money, and it was $10,000, meant a hell of a lot. They could have kept that and just enjoyed that and done all the things they like to do, but they gave that to Bar on the Beach. I shall never forget that. You know, I just wanted to, this morning I was thinking, we're saying cheerio when celebrating the life of Bob Roberts, and this is the kind of, if he was here today, and this is the kind of story that he would tell, I think. And it's a fantasy story, so you need to follow along. After his presidency is nearly over, this has got nothing to do with Bob, but as I say, President Donald Trump goes on a farewell visit to Israel, and while he's on a tour of Jerusalem, he suffers a heart attack and he passes away. Oh dear, how sad, but never mind. The undertaker tells the US diplomats accompanying him, you can have him shipped home for $5 million, or you can bury him here in the Holy Land for just $100. And the diplomats, they go into a corner and they discuss this for a minute. They come back to the undertaker and tell him that they want Trump shipped home. And the undertaker is puzzled and asks, well, why would you spend $5 million to ship him home when it would be wonderful, wonderful, to be buried here, and you would only spend $100? And with the money you save, you could help pay back some of the US deficit, help pay for Obamacare, or help the elderly. And the American diplomats replied, Now listen, a long time ago a man died here, was buried here, and 3 days later he rose from the dead. We just can't take the risk.
Well, you know what they say, imitation is the finest form of flattery. Well, if that's true, in my case, no one was more flattering than Bob Robertson. Even my own family thought it was me when they listened to Bob imitating me on Double Exposure. I'd say, come on, I'd never say things that stupid. They'd look at me and say, really? Bob and Linda's brand of humor helped stitch this country together, got us through tense and ugly times by making us smile at just how ridiculous we could become. That's a real skill, an art we could use more of, especially at this time. Bob, we miss you, but we'll never forget you.
Yeah, we used to always say it was the greatest form of flattery, just because if we were worried we were going to get punched out, that's, you know, but it's not. Bob, his family came to Canada. There's those little vampire bugs. Came to Canada when Bob was 7, so 1952, if my arithmetic is correct. And so, you know, was raised in Ajax, Ontario. Strange little town. And I always said, you know, I married him despite all that. Strange town, but interesting. A lot of interesting stories. And what was great about it was he formed strong, long friendships there with at least three, but more people that, because I can't, my grade 1 math, it's gone. And there are a lot of very funny stories. When Bob was doing radiation last March, one of his friends from high school lives in Duncan. I did 3 days because we had to commute to Victoria, so I drove him down 3 days from Nanaimo, and his friend came up from Duncan and took him Tuesday and Wednesday. And so they had all this time in the car to talk about this, and I'd like him to tell you about this little town. So please welcome John Caldwell, one of his best friends. Come on up, John. I remember this time. Yeah, I'm what kind of tech am I?
Yeah, I can't believe I follow Peter Mansbridge. And I'm really sorry, Linda, couldn't you have set something up so Peter would introduce me and said, now here's John live from Bard on the Beach in Kitsilano. Yes, Peter, I'm here. You know, something like that I think would be great. I think it's really fitting that Bob's Bon Voyage is close to July 1st because really no one was more unabashedly Canadian than Bob, and of course Double Exposure with Bob and Linda was the most Canadian of shows. I know Linda said she asked me to share some short, she emphasized that, humorous incidents about Bob as he was growing up in our hometown of Ajax, Ontario. However, I'd say most of those anecdotes aren't really fitting for this occasion, although I'm sure Bob would have loved them and had a good laugh at them, as he loves stories. But as we have heard, Bob and Bob with Linda have had many artistic successes over the years, and I don't want to dismiss these because you know how successful they have been, but I thought I'd try to honor Bob in his memory by presenting another picture of him. The Bob that some of us, family and friends, knew before he became well known. We are so proud of Bob and his achievements, but in my case at least, I will remember him mostly as a good friend. Over the last year, as Linda said, I was fortunate under really bad circumstances in that I had the opportunity to be with Bob as we drove down from Nanaimo to Victoria on the car trips. And over those 3 or 4 hour journeys, we talked about a myriad of things. Of course, we talked about his family, who he was so proud of. Linda, who is amazingly caring and strong through all those trying days, and Gail, his first wife, who was supportive of the situation and helped out so much. But typically, as we always did when we got together, our wives weren't too happy about this most of the time. We chattered on about growing up in our town, Ajax, and the friends and memories we shared. You know, Linda mentioned 3 or 4 friends, but Bob has many friends who have known him for over 60 years, some of whom spent up to 10 years not only in the same school, but in the same classroom as Bob. We still meet on occasion. And although we have referred to Bob as the consummate Canadian, Bob recalled his first day in elementary school when he arrived, newly arrived from Newcastle in England. And Bob mentions to me that his mother made him wear his English school clothes, shorts, a blue sports jacket, shirt and tie, and those little beanies that the English kids wear to school. He told me he felt incredibly out of place. I mean, it sounded like a traumatic experience for him, and that he felt he never would fit in. But from that day, he said, he was determined to adapt and become a real Canadian. I don't remember that day, but I do remember the young Bob Robertson who became such a good friend to so many of us. I'm sure that we'd all want to take some kind of credit in the town for the early development of Bob's sense of humor, and Linda's told you a bit about that, but in my case, he mentioned something that I'd forgotten about, and that was the hours we spent in my basement. He even knew the name of the hi-fi we played, the Sea Breeze or something we played LPs on, and those LPs he mentioned also and remembered happened to be 2 risque albums that my parents had smuggled in from Buffalo, New York, because they don't have things like that in Canada, and Bob's Goon Squad LPs, as I recall. So we'd chuckle over the dirty parts, even if we didn't understand them. And this really may have been the beginning of Bob's ability to mimic, because obviously he was a brilliant mimic. He would repeat many of those dirty jokes to his friends word for word and with the appropriate accent. So Bob really, to be honest, was a good student, but not a great student. But his real talents were apparent very early. His sense of humor sometimes escaped us. But Bob always had an eye for the bizarre, odd characters and situations. And I'm proud to say that Ajax was the right town for that, and that we had more than our share of all of these. However, I don't recall Bob's humor ever being cruel or demeaning towards his friends or classmates, and he could have done that very easily thinking back. But his humor was truly observant, thoughtful, and clever. I think that it really was Bob's sense of justice, his concern for what ought not to be, if that makes sense, that made Bob unique. It's also apparent in his comedy. Our friend Don, who is here from California with his wife Tess, reminded me recently of an anecdote about Bob that I can tell, hopefully without offending many. And this should illustrate how Bob's sense of what is right and just colored his decisions. A group of us in our early teenage years belonged to the AYPA, the Anglican Young People's Association, and Bob was president that year. Of course, being fairly normal youths, our primary reason for belonging to this club associated with the fairly traditional church was not necessarily to receive acceptance as a member of that church. Of course, we had other ulterior motives. We were there to have fun and to meet girls. And we knew that the best way to achieve our aim was to hold a dance in the church basement, hopefully with the lights dimmed. Who would have believed that a church basement could be so seductive? But after getting permission to hold the dance, Bob, as president, decided that maybe we should open the dance to other young people in the town. At that time, Ajax had a number of newly arrived people, and especially recently arrived immigrants. And really, we should welcome them, Bob thought, especially any young women among them who might feel particularly lonely. This sounded like a great idea until Bob also felt strongly that we should also formally invite our friends from another church group in town, the Catholic Youth Association. This, as you can imagine, caused a great furor among the church leaders. Catholics in a Protestant church basement, the scandal. I can't even remember if we held the dance without our Catholic friends, but what I do remember is Bob's concern for the unfairness of the situation. He was irate at the injustice of it all, especially because Bob had his eye on a particular young lady at that time who just happened to be Catholic. I know that Bob had a great love for that strange town, the people in it, and many of his friends from Ajax. He had talked about writing a book that was inspired by the stories and characters from the town. Linda recently sent me a story outline based on some discussions we had had, and I'm sure that, like all of Bob's work, if he had finished it, it would have been unique and humorous. Over the years, it's obvious how Bob and Linda have managed to master all of the media in their professional lives. Numerous radio programs, a successful TV show. They have written many articles and 2 books. Their live shows have been very well received, and over the past few years, they have been an internet presence with their clever online show, Newsapalooza. So I was thinking, and I do that less and less as I'm getting older, but I'm really hoping, after all of that experience, perhaps by now, that Bob has mastered some kind of a celestial medium, and that maybe he's listening to us right now. So Bob, if you are tuned in, on behalf of your old friends from Ajax, we love you, and we will miss you. And we'll always have great memories of our times together. And don't worry, the stories of Ajax and you will be with us and will be retold forever.
Hi, I'm Nancy White.
And I'm Bob Johnson. I'm Nancy's accompanist when there's a piano.
And we had the honor of touring with Bob and Linda a couple of times, and I think probably it was because in those days I was also a CBC radio performer. I was in a show called Sunday Morning, and it was kind of a comedy thing that I did.
It was very much a comedy.
So my manager, Campbell Webster, thought it might be a good combination, and he contacted Bob and Linda, and it happened. It was really thrilling.
It was very exciting because for me, I grew up listening to CBC radio at the dinner table. That's how I met Nancy when she used to do Sunday
morning. I was at his dinner table listening to the radio with him. It was a bond.
I think you were.
I think so.
And so to get to do a show with double exposure was a real thrill. It was like big time.
It was huge.
And normally we tour with other musicians, or if it's a folk festival, there's other musicians. But in this case, it was a comedy act.
And it was so efficient because the sound check was short. They had 2 voices and maybe a tambourine or something.
And we had Todd
Elvidge
and Gary Heald.
Yeah, they brought their own crew, imagine.
And that never happens.
And we had a road manager,
Wayne O'Connor.
So we were real taken care of on that tour.
Bob and Linda were very easy to travel with.
Yeah.
They were the consummate professionals. Do you remember the ironing?
Oh, man.
At National Arts Center.
Of course, I am pro-union. You know, I love the troops and I'm pro-union. But
I am too.
We were playing at the National Arts Center and Bob wanted to iron his shirt and he asked the crew if he could borrow an iron. And they said he certainly could, but you can have the punchline.
Well, there had to be somebody standing over the iron.
Yes.
There
No,
was-
he had to pay the
to
wardrobe
pay-
mistress $100 to just supervise.
Yeah, to supervise the.
She would do the ironing. We were going to get her to iron all her clothes, but Bob went back to the hotel and ironed it for free. It's so sad he's gone. I can't believe he's gone.
It's a sad occasion. It's nice to think about the fun that
Yeah.
he gave us personally,
Yeah, no, he's
and the
grand.
fun that he gave all of us as listeners
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah.
I hear you've written a song.
I've written a song. I've written a sad song, a goodbye song, and it's called Bonnie Bob. It's not about you. No, I'm just going to do it now. It's a cappella, so
I may just pipe in.
please pipe in
as
if
I
you
get
can.
the melody.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
melody.
yeah. Oh, our Bonnie Bob is gone, and there's sorrow in the nation, sadness on the airwaves, weeping on the coast. For this man of wit and wisdom, oh so classy, oh so clever, our bonny boy, Bob Robertson, is the one we'll miss the most. Now when Bob was on the radio, and you were on the road to somewhere, you'd have to pull off to the side, or else you'd wreck your van. 'Cause no one could steer when Bob would do Gretchen or Preston Manning. He nailed it and he owned it, Bonnie Bob, he was the man. People laugh when 20 midgets jump out of a tiny car. People love a good joy buzzer or exploding cigar. But when a subtle joke was called for, there was no one did the job like that man of bloody brilliance, our darling Bonnie Bob. Oh, our Bonnie Bob is gone, and there's sorrow in the nation, sadness on the airwaves, weeping on the coast. For that man of wit and wisdom, oh so classy, oh so clever, our Bonnie boy Bob Robertson is the one we'll miss the most.
Thank you, Bob.
So I am the Todd Elvidge that Nancy and Bob referred to in that video. I had the very great pleasure of working with Bob and Linda for all the years that Double Exposure was on CBC Radio as their producer and travel mate, and eventually, and finally, I think, becoming friends with both of them. We spent a lot of time together, not as much as Bob and Linda did. These two people were in the office all day, every day. They socialized together. They did everything together, except in the early days, they didn't go home together. So it was weird. They spent all this time together, split up at the end of the day, and went and did who knows what. Over the years, I got to know Bob quite well. We spent a lot of time talking about, as Charlie mentioned, he was always interested in the big things in life, but he talked about the small things too, the meaning of the universe and why are we all here. But he did have opinions on the really big things. Scotch, which was better, Lowland or Highland? And it was around some of those conversations that some of our best times were had. I remember traveling with Double Exposure to do a live show in Montreal, and with Bob and Linda, it was often business, business, business. The show was created from nothing each week. When they went and did live public performances for audiences, large or small, they would create unique individual shows tailored to that audience. They worked all the time. Except this one time we were in Montreal. We were at an Irish pub called Hurley's. I'm not making it up, Hurley's. And for some reason, after embracing a couple of beers, Bob decided he would embrace his Northern English roots and spent the rest of the evening speaking with an absolutely incomprehensible Geordie accent. Nobody knew why. He was absolutely deadpan and straight with it, never let it slip, on and on and on and on. You might be beginning to get a sense of why it's called Hurley's. On. The only good thing that came of it was, at least in Montreal that night, nobody could accuse Bob of speaking English because they couldn't understand a word he said. We spent time together And until not that long ago, it never occurred to me that there might be no time we could spend together. I didn't spend enough time with Bob and Linda in the later years. Who knew? I figured we had tons of time together. But as I got to know Bob, I realized that he was a compassionate, caring, smart, incredibly talented man who left a huge mark on my soul and my life. I think my daughters who are here today were probably 2 and 3 years old when they first appeared in a double exposure sketch. So they were part of their lives as well. They've been part of everybody's lives in the room here. Bob made so many people laugh. He made me laugh so many times. He made such incredible accomplishments in his life, and he left so much for us to remember and to remember him by. And as I say, I wish I could have had more time, Bob. It was wonderful to know you, and wherever you are, it was great. Thank you, and you'll be missed.
Much beer was consumed, as well as scotch. Bob's humor lives on. I mean, it's, you know, it's on the internet, a lot of it's there, but it lives in a human being as well. She's incredibly successful in her own right, and has made us laugh a lot down since I've known her. She's one of the stars of Schitt's Creek, a tremendously successful comedy show on CBC television. Actually, I think you are the star, aren't you? You're the only one on there. No, you're not? I can't believe it. Anyway, I want you to please give a big round of applause to one of my best friends, Jen Robertson.
Does that work? Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Many years ago, my dad took a trip to New Mexico. And when he came back, he told me this beautiful story about the Navajo people. I'm gonna keep it together, I can promise. The story goes, and it is true, in the Navajo culture, when a baby is born, they don't have like a big party or a big celebration because they believe that the baby is still sort of straddling these two worlds, the world that they've come from and the world that they've been born into. And they don't believe that the baby is truly here until the baby laughs for the first time. And whoever it is that made the baby laugh gets to have the honor of throwing a big party, and everybody recognizes that they are now here, they are now present, and they are now human because they get the joke. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of amazing, isn't it? It's true. And nobody loved to make people laugh more than my dad. As everybody's been saying here today, my dad just wasn't an amazing, funny entertainer. He was also a really good person. And he was a helper. If there was anybody in his life, friend or family, that needed help or support, he would step in. That's the kind of man that he was. And the greatest gift that he gave to me was that he was really present in my life, my whole life, not just there, but actually present. And there is a lifetime of memories that would not fit on this piece of paper. But some great ones are, when I was a teenager, we used to go on these father-daughter trips to New York City. And they were incredible and weird, as New York City can only be. One of the trips, we went to go see an off-Broadway one-man show of A Tale of Two Cities. And what was not listed in the description of the show was that the actor during the performance was going to strip down completely naked, have a bath, and dress in drag. I was 14 years old. My eyes were like saucers. Dear diary, I saw my first real naked man today. I didn't think my dad would be there too. We stayed at the world's largest Ramada Inn on one visit, and a drunken Texan man insisted we were in his room. I was shot in the ass by a blow dart in Times Square on our way to a matinee of Guys and Talls, as you do. And we went to a psychic once who swore I was going to become a soap star, and she said my dad's life was going to be amazing because she was going to light 100 candles for him that day in a church. And he said, "Oh, thank you." And then she said, "It's $1 a candle." He was an amazing person and a cheerleader to many, and this show is exactly how he would want to be remembered, with fondness and with laughter. And I want to thank Linda for putting this together, and everybody for being on the show. Losing your life partner is hard enough, but editing things on a computer is almost as difficult. And I know she has put so much work into organizing this, and it can't be easy in a time when you feel a little bit adrift. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for laughing. And I have a sibling, the other Robertson child, who's no longer a child either, who needs to come up, and he wants to talk about my dad too. This is my brother, Patrick Robertson.
Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today about my father. My name is Robert Patrick Robertson, and I am Bob Robertson's son. My dad has touched all of you in some positive way that we are gathered here today, and I'm here to tell you what positive influence he had on me. I can't recall my earliest memory of my dad, but I have an overall memory of always looking up at him, and he was a big guy from an early age. I felt that he was a giant, and I confess that I was even a little scared of him because he was so big. I do recall always being aware at a young age that my dad was on the radio, but it didn't really sink in that he was kind of famous until I was around 9 or 10 years old. He was always more my dad than an entertainer or a famous guy, in my childhood until he died. That doesn't mean I didn't think it was very cool what he did for a living. I started to take notice, or better, be aware of what he did for a living when he got the opportunity to fill in for Norm Groman doing the weather and voice impression comedy bit in the morning on the CKNW morning show with Frosty Forst. My dad would phone into the radio station, do his bit completely over the phone from his desk in the master bedroom at home before my sister and I went to school. We all had to be very quiet for about 15 minutes while he spoke, and under no circumstances were we ever to accidentally pick up the telephone. When my dad and Linda started doing their own show, Double Exposure, on CBC shortly after the CKNW years, I knew that he had truly become a local and national radio celebrity. Strangers would walk up to him on the street and say hi and talk about a piece that they did on the weekly Saturday morning show. And I started to see the personally signed photos from people like Brian Mulroney, Bill Vander Zalm, and Don Cherry. I heard stories about running into Pierre Trudeau in the bathroom at a political party convention, and also hanging out for the evening at the same table with people like Joe Clark. Regardless of his fame, he was really just my dad to me. He was the guy that I went to Whitecaps and Canucks games with as a kid. Sorry. The guy I loved to hang out with and even just watch TV and share some laughs about something funny. The guy who came to watch me play in almost every one of my football games in high school, the guy who was there to listen to me when I was upset about something that I perceived was bad or wrong in my life, and he let me know that it was going to be okay. And that disappointment and failure was just one part of life that we all need to learn from to be stronger and succeed. I won't elaborate on just how generous and giving my dad was to me. Like many of you here today, you understood just how truly generous he was. My dad was one of my heroes growing up and still is to this day. I was able to hear stories about his career changes and decisions that led to his successes, and have drawn upon his experiences for myself and how I've made decisions in my life. Many of his career moves were done under perceived illogical conditions and came with temporarily perceived failures, but ultimately that led him down a better and more rewarding career path. I know he saw opportunities that were in front of him and made sure he didn't waste them. His encouragement for me to pursue my career in construction wasn't his path, but he was full of praise for me in chasing my dreams, and I'm grateful for his support in doing so. I wasn't cut out for radio or television or the arts or entertainment like he was, but it was okay with him that I chose to pursue what made me happy and what I was good at. I remember one night in October 2013 where my dad and Linda came over for a visit to my house, and we ended up having one too many Grey Goose on the rocks in the hot tub talking about life together. It was a moment for me when I realized that my dad was also just a regular human being, talking about his successes and failures in life, but he spoke to me not as a child, but as one man to another. I was able to tell him about things in my life that I'd previously been too scared and embarrassed to talk to him about. It was a defining moment for me in my life, and maybe it was for him too. I respected and loved my father more after that night than I had ever had, as he showed me that it was also okay to be vulnerable. Not perfect, not all the time. On Wednesday, February 22nd of this year, I came over to Nanaimo to visit him for what would turn out to be the last time I got to speak to him. I didn't know this, although I knew he was still in really rough shape. We spoke for 4 hours, and he spoke mostly about how grateful he was for Linda taking care of him and how my life was going. My dad didn't deserve the physical and mental pain and suffering he endured for the 15 months that led up to his death, but that no human being does. He hardly complained throughout this suffering, and that is a testament to who he was, someone who would rather get on with it and solve problems rather than dwell on the negative and the obvious. Many of you know what the chemotherapy did to his body in those last few months, and I personally learned just how tough my dad really was, watching how he handled it. To me, I believe that my father was able to live a great life while he was here. He was given the opportunity to have a rewarding and fulfilling career of his choice, to experience marriage and having children, to become a granddad, and to meet the love of his life and share many years with her. The only real regret that I have regarding my dad is that I wish he'd been given more time to enjoy life and what it had to offer him. I will miss not being able to see him and talk to him and have him share his wisdom with me in life. I really miss him. Thank you for coming today and to honor the memory of my father and allowing me to share some of my memories of him with you. Thank you.
I know it's getting warm in here. There's some people I need to thank today. I'll put my glasses on just so I don't pronounce anything wrong. I can't thank Chris Gaze. I can't thank you enough for letting us do this here. There was just no other place that could have been better. And I should tell you now that thanks to me not feeding any of you here, we're going to take that money and dedicate a seat in the theater to Bob and add a little bit more to that as well. So. So Chris, I just want to thank you and everyone here and the volunteers. You've just made this perfect. Our producer from the radio show, Todd, I couldn't have done this without you. I have to thank Bob's first wife, Gail, for all her help over several months of crises. She was there at the hospital so much, I started telling the doctors that if I wasn't there, then my sister wife would be. So I appreciate it more than I can tell you. And I want to express my deepest appreciation to his sister, Jean Wilson, who put her life in Lindsay, Ontario on hold for almost 3 months to come and stay with us in Nanaimo. And she kept my 88-year-old mother alive. She got the laundry done, and she stocked the shelves with many, many, many cans of tuna. You know we don't have cats, right? And Jen, for keeping me sane, reminding me it was still okay to laugh in the worst possible moments. Someday we'll write a book, or we'll do a sitcom. We'll just do a sitcom, Life in ICU. It'll be hilarious. And those people who've traveled some distance. My cousin John Cullen is here. He got in from England last night, and it means everything to me that you've come here. My cousin Jill Milnes, she's come down from Prince Rupert with her son Damien. Just graduated, so I'm sure she's really relieved from high school. His brother John and his wife Shirley and their son Bill from Ottawa. It's great to have you here with us. His high school friend Don Fairley and his wife Tess from California. My friend Bonnie Comfort, who came here from Portland. It's just fantastic to have these people here. And there are others, I know there are others that have come from a distance, and I just want to thank you all for coming here today. It was a long-standing joke between Bob and I that it would be something weird that would get him in the end, because he was famous for getting these goofy maladies, you know, like his exploding baby toe in 1986. He was walking around Expo 86 with Gail and the kids, and his toe started hurting. And he ended up in hospital for days, and they almost had to amputate this baby toe. And years later, we thought that it might have been in the flesh-eating disease family, you know, but not the serious version, just one of the low-achieving bugs, you know, that, oh my God, I'm just so literally so tired. I can only eat a toe. Only a toe, and not a big toe. I can only do a little baby toe. That's how tired I literally am. Or it could have been fat lip, which is exactly as it sounds. All of a sudden, fat lips. So they were weird. They were weird, but I was sure that the thing that would truly take him down would be red patch. He used to get these red patches on his legs, and they would start out really tiny, and then it would expand, 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 expand. They would go away, and then it would come up on another leg on the other side, and the same thing would happen. And finally, he went to a dermatologist, and the doctor said, "So what's your problem?" And Mr. Roberts, he said, "Well, doc, I've got this red patch on my legs." And he said, "Well, let's take a look at it." Scrapes a bit off, puts it under the microscope, turns around, looks at him, he says, "Well, you have, Mr. Robertson, what we like to call in the medical business, red patch. Here's some cream, good luck." Well, in the end, it wasn't red patch, but it was a pretty rare kind of thing, breast cancer in a man. And he wasn't embarrassed by it. He did just want to deal with it, wanted to get it done, get it out of the way. Although he was a little concerned after he had the mastectomy that he looked a little odd, you know, as you would be, that he's a little lopsided. But I said to him, "You do not worry about that. That was my least favorite breast." It really bugged me, that nipple always staring at you, so get rid of it. So needless to say, this was not part of the plan. Of course, when you're a woman, you have to be prepared for the fact that your husband will probably go first. Statistics show, on average, the husband is most likely to die before the wife due to age, health reasons, or continually leaving the toilet seat up. They will die first. But when you marry someone who's almost 14 years older than you, the chances of that happening only increase. But the way I saw the plan unfolding was that Bob would be 100, I would be 87, and I'd be pushing his wheelchair up Granville Street, South Granville, when I suddenly would be distracted by a shiny new garlic press in Williams and Sonoma. And I'd stop and I'd momentarily take my hands off the wheelchair, and he'd go plummeting down Granville, out of control, blasting out onto Broadway, where you would instantly get mowed down by thousands and thousands of bicycles, which would be the only things allowed on Broadway by that time, or anywhere in Vancouver, anywhere. But as Bob always said, expect the unexpected. And I really believe that the things that Bob would want to be remembered for, you already know. One of his main goals in life was to be recognized for his unique talents. Well, mission accomplished, Bob. And there are so many stories. There's so much to tell. It would just take too long, and you all apparently have lives to lead. So I thought that the best thing I could do today, as quickly as possible, is to tell you the things that Bob figured out about life. Let's call them the tenets of Bob. And there are only a few, because and that's the way it should be, because you don't want to be spending all your time writing down hundreds and hundreds of tenets, because you'll get that tenets elbow. He wouldn't be happy with that either, no. But I had to get one pun in. And he spent a lot of time way back in the 70s, when there wasn't much work, in Banyan Books up on West Broadway, trying to answer those important questions for him. Who am I? What's life all about? Why does wine taste so much better in the tasting room? And through that search and trial and error, I think he boiled it down to a few simple things. Number one, the golden rule. Now, he wasn't a religious guy, although he was okay with the mystery. He was raised, as you heard, in the Anglican Church. He was a choir boy, mostly because he wanted to meet choir girls. But he thought the most important aspect of any religious book was treat people the way you want to be treated. That's it. Treat people the way you want to be treated. 2, love. And that covers a lot of things. He loved a lot. He loved coffee and muffins, talking while we had coffee and muffins. He loved reading. He loved history. He loved politics. He loved Hawaii. He loved coffee and muffins in Hawaii. He loved the ocean. He loved to entertain people. He loved to make people laugh. He loved to write funny things. He had another book that he was anxious to get started on. He loved our cats. He loved road trips. He loved road coffee and muffins. So I think you see there's a theme here. He loved his kids. Always, always, they were his first priority. He was incredibly proud that they were both successes in careers they had chosen and were extremely good at, and that they loved as well. He loved scotch. He loved to pour the Robertson dram. He loved being with friends. He loved being alone. He loved sitting by the ocean for hours, contemplating. He loved to take risks, not so much physical ones, but creative risks, life risks. He was perfectly okay jumping off the cliff and building the parachute on the way down. The first time I met him, I knew then and there that at some point I would grab a hold of him and I would jump with him. And he took me on an incredible journey. And I believe I got the better end of that deal. And he had no regrets. No regrets. Because he always felt that any mistakes, wrong turns, missteps, always led him to where he was at that moment. And he loved life and he wanted more. And third, and I really think that this was the most important thing for Bob. I think this was his most important tenet. Be in the moment. Be in the moment. He wanted to be in the moment as much as possible because he knew that if you weren't in the moment, you probably weren't enjoying whatever was going on right then. Or you weren't paying attention to another person who may be trying to tell you that they need you, or they're scared, or they're happy, or they love you. If you're too wrapped up in what could happen or what did happen, the good stuff that's happening right now is just going to fly right by. He always said, nothing stays the same. Bad, good, things always change. Expect the unexpected. And whatever that might be, he knew that life goes on. So while you're here, be in the moment and enjoy those moments as often as possible. That's what he figured out a long time ago. My cousin, I was talking to him this morning, and he was telling me that he'd had a conversation with his son within the last few days before John left, and he said that James really loved him, and he'd come out here for a week years ago when he was much younger with his girlfriend, and we did a lot of the touristy things. And he said James said to him, when you were around him, he left you happier than he found you. And I think that really sums it all up. And I'm just so, so glad he found me. I just thank you, everybody, for coming today. Thank you.
Smile, though your heart is aching. Smile, even though it's breaking. When there are clouds in the sky, you'll get by. If you smile through your fear and sorrow, smile, and maybe tomorrow you'll see the sun come shining through for you.
Light up your face with gladness, hide every trace of sadness. Although tear may be ever so near, that's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.
Light up your face with gladness, hide every trace of sadness, although a tear may be ever so near, that's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Tom. Thank you. That was lovely. And so now, we're going to open up these doors, and we're going to let Bob go to the beach. Thank you, everybody. I love you.